Now, I know you're not going to believe me when I say this, because this is the most consistent my channel growth has ever been since I started doing YouTube. Thank you for 25k, by the way. But I don't want to just be a Xenoblade 3 news channel until July. I have like 4 or 5 other video ideas that I'd love to get started on. But no, they have to keep giving us more info about this game, to the point where I have to cut things off. I have to make sure I only cover a week's worth of info in each one of these videos, because if I didn't, they would get too long. And this is me talking about a video getting too long, so you know there's a lot of stuff. Other than that, spoilers for Xenoblade 1, 2, Torrent, and Future Connected lie ahead. You do not have to watch any of my previous analyses about Xenoblade 3, but it might help you to get some clarification on things. And this is the first week where all we have is tweets to go off of. Most of the Japanese ones were actually translated within the same week's time frame, so that's neat. And we got translations of a few previously Japanese-only ones, so there is a lot to talk about. The first is another tweet about Ethel. And it really seems like they're pushing her in the advertisements for this game a bit more than they originally intended to, because later in the week, we actually got a bio for Kamaravi like Ethel did, but I have my sneaking suspicions that they were originally going to put those two out on the same day or on back-to-back days, because they like doing duality with a lot of these character bios. Van Damme was the only previous one to not do that. And then they saw the massive positive, though largely horny, reception Ethel got when the trailer dropped and decided to push hers up by about a week, in addition to giving us 28 seconds of a flashback cutscene depicting her relationship with the Keves party. It is, of course, distinctly possible that she just straight up plays a more important role in the story than Kamaravi, but they are rivals and counterparts across the two nations, so it's a little bit weird that these two are not on even footing. We of course also know at least one other Agnes commander than Keves, because Iserd also exists, but again, I'm pretty sure that he was just picked to be in the trailer, and there is another slightly less important than Ethel, Keves character, who also commands a colony that we have not yet seen. As for this scene, it actually backs up several different things that I've been talking about. While we knew already from the Japanese relationship chart that Noah and Ethel did meet in the past before, we can see that it was not just Noah who she met and was presumably acquainted with, as Noah is in a group of 5. 3 of the other members are very obviously younger Lanz, Uni, and Riku, so the Keves party as we know in the present day, and then there's this other Hyantia that appears to be a young boy. Your first instinct might be, oh, this is Xeon, the other Keves soldier Hyantia who we've seen, but the hair and wing color do not match up. This is the first time we've seen this character, and it's child soldiers, and the world of Xenoblade 3, there is a distinct possibility that this character is dead, and we can already add another number onto the Noah trauma chart. This is an important thing we need to keep track of. Noah is a Xeno protagonist, good things are not allowed to happen to him, so we need to keep the Noah trauma counter updated. We already have was a child soldier, is being hunted down by the nation he once served, and is called a monster by one of the people who saved his life as a kid and he obviously looks up to, and now, very possible one of his friends died in front of him at a young age. So that's 2, pushing 3 already, and we've still got 2.5 months to go. As for the rest of the clip, the location seems to be the same Keves town in the one scene with young Noah in the second trailer, the one where it looks like the two worlds are directly coming together. These do not have to take place near each other. Noah as a kid is there, but it's possible he's just reliving that past event, and it's not just straight up a flashback to something that happened to Noah in his past when he was alive and stuff. We don't know how much time has passed since the worlds merged. Me saying that in the last video was probably a mistake. The cool thing that had not been pointed out yet is that this town, or some of the buildings in it at least, heavily resemble the military district from Colony 9. So while we could already pretty reasonably guess that this was a Keves settlement just because we saw Noah there, this seems to indicate that it is a very important Keves settlement, as it was built up around one of the few remaining Homs towns after the end of Xenoblade 1. The Agnes mech attacking the characters is not particularly special. We've seen plenty of these before. I think it might even be the exact same model we see Iserd standing down in the previous trailer, so yeah, it's an Agnes thing, nothing special there. But then Ethel shows up, and that's the interesting part. She is visibly younger, just as the rest of the party is, and I would say she looks to be the same age Noah, Uni, and Lanz are in the present day. So she seems to be about 18 here, which backs up my theory that her clock time is running out, in the present day of the main game, because I would say she looks like she could be in her mid to late 20s there. She's using the exact same weapon she has later on in the present day, which of course makes sense. That's how blades work in this universe. And it seems like Noah is not the only one who is heavily influenced by meeting her here, as her outfit is virtually identical to the one Uni is wearing as a Keves soldier in the beginning of the main game. All in all, this scene doesn't really tell us a whole lot. Most of this was stuff we already knew, and I think most of us also definitely think that Noah and Ethel's first meeting would be shown in a flashback at some point, but the fact that all of the other current Keves party members are there adds a lot more to this scene, and will make the fact that Ethel is trying to kill the party a lot more intense, because it's not just one of the characters that has a connection with her. The text of the tweet reads, "There's a bit of history between Noah's team and Ethel of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. When they were all much younger, Ethel saved them from an Agnian attack. Since then, Noah and his friends have looked up to her, so why does she now see them as enemies?" Obviously, if you've analyzed the release date trailer, you could probably guess that she sees them as enemies because of the Ouroboros thing, but the important part about this tweet is the term Agnian being used to refer to someone or something from Agnes. This is good. I was genuinely concerned that they would go for the term that was my default brain setting for that from Agnes, which was Agnusi, Agnusi. That is the thing my brain jumps to just from how the name is structured in English. And I didn't want them to do that because I wouldn't be able to take it seriously, because anytime it was shown in text but not vocally said with voice acting, my brain would definitely pronounce it Agnusi, and I did not want that to happen. So, very good localization decision. Thank you very much, Nintendo. One last thing about Ethel herself, though, there is a close-up on her chest area, and we can see that her tattoo is first off there, which makes sense. I think they're tied to being able to summon a blade, and she does that, and a lot more red than it is in the present day. In my last video, I did erroneously claim that her tattoo was completely gray, and I was wrong. If you look closely, the center diamond does have some red on it still, but either way, it started out more red, it is now barely red. I'm thinking the more red you have in your tattoo, the more time you have left to live. While we'll see later in the week that the English language Nintendo branches did get access to an English ROM of the game to capture their own version of some of this footage, the next tweet is a Japanese-only gameplay one. The intended purpose of this clip is to show that you can change which target you're currently attacking and use that to strategically take down enemies. Keep in mind, some of these clips are explicitly directed at people new to the Xenoblade series. Not everything is going to contain a big revelation about the game, and that's perfectly okay. But because of the UI being shown, we can glean a couple more things about the combat system, some that raise more questions, and some that are very concerning. Unfortunately, despite this being the enemy targeting clip, we can't actually see how the process of targeting enemies works, because it zooms in on the enemy HP bar and shows that changing, and then zooms back out, so we can't really tell at all what button command was actually used to swap targets, though my money is still on holding down R and then using A and Y. The party here is level 12, and we can only see the right side of the arts palette without fusion arts, left side arts, or the interlink button, which all tracks with other footage we've seen. The first enemy being targeted is a heavy Brog, and the target is then changed to a Mordo Blant. All of this is very par for the course. We can see more enemy tags in the background. However, I am going to talk about the interesting thing in those a bit later, because there is a tweet that explicitly explains what's interesting about those. Another quality of life UI element that pops up at one point in this clip that I've seen in other trailers and just never really pointed out was the starburst red exclamation point over Noah's head when his HP gets low. This is obviously not particularly helpful when you're the one controlling Noah, but if you're controlling a healer, you can now see if someone in your party gets low on HP while you're looking at the center of the screen to see what the enemies are doing instead of focusing on the party list. Useful quality of life change. That seems to be one of the big names of this game, so not a lot to say, but it's cool. The tactics menu is opened yet again, and we can see that there are only 3 of the D-pad buttons available. The 3 you'd expect are there, but the focus on fusion arts button is not. This confirms that it's not just Noah not having set any secondary class arts to make fusion arts out of, it's that the party does not have access to fusion arts whatsoever at this current point in the story. So, like in every Xenoblade game, fusion arts are a mechanic that you just don't get right off the bat, but the fact that party member switching is there suggests you're going to get that early on, if not in Battle 1. It's time to talk about the arts and my concerns for this battle system now, but I'm going to get the positives out of the way first, because I'm really intrigued by what they're doing with the special/talent art on the A button. We get to see a lot about how it seems to work in this game, as it goes from completely empty to 2/3 charged throughout the duration of this clip. It seems like all the talk in the promotional material about how important positioning is for DPS characters was not an exaggeration, as we can see Noah using an uncancelled, mind you, sword strike from the side to inflict a break on the Brog, and that instantaneously fills up 1/3 of the talent gauge. After switching targets, Noah uses Air Slash on the Blant. Air Slash is not a positional art in this game. It is a cancel art, which just means it does an increased amount of damage than usual when cancelling off of an auto attack, so he uses that while cancelled. The animation is similar to Alvis's Monado Purge from that one cutscene in Magna Forest, which is another cute little Easter egg to Xenoblade 1, and that does not fill the talent gauge at all. And then Noah uses a cancelled thrust edge from behind, hitting the positional, and the talent gauge increases by another 1/3. The A button prompt also lights up a lot more than it did for the first attack, so my guess would be it does that if you cancel the art. That's the only thing I can really think of, but it could really be anything. Maybe it just lights up more the more the gauge was already full when you did that next art to increase it. Don't really know. But the cool thing about this is, we can clearly see that the thing that increases Noah's talent gauge, at least in this sword fighter class, is hitting positional arts, which is different to how any sort of special move gauge has filled in the past in any other Xenoblade game, really. We know that the gauge refill doesn't just come from landing the bonus effects on your arts whatsoever, or the Air Slash would have triggered it, but we also have a pretty good indication that only DPS classes are going to have positional arts. Tanks and healers, it seems like, will not. So this seems to suggest that the way you generate talent gauge is at the very least dependent on the role of the main class of the character you're controlling. This is a departure from the entire rest of the series. In Xenoblade 1, all talent gauges charged up the exact same way, with the exception of a couple people. In X, everyone had overdrive and that was activated the same way. In 2, everyone had blade specials and that was activated the same way. And in Torna, people also had blade specials, but then the talent art was a separate thing, and those were some of the most non-cohesive abilities in the entire series. So, this is new, this is neat. I have no idea how tanks and healers will charge it. Like, you'd think it would be good design to, oh, if a healer heals properly, then they get their talent art. But what if you're good enough at tanking and DPSing that you're not taking enough damage to need to heal? Like, if you tied it to reviving characters, and then no one died, you're just screwing your healer out of their biggest ability, because you're good at the game. So, I have a feeling they're gonna have to come up with alternate ways for non-DPS characters to charge their talent arts, and I'm interested in what they're gonna come up with. I feel like healer is the hardest, tank is probably a lot easier, because you can just tie it to aggro generation, and that would be a fairly easy thing to do, and a fairly easy thing to come up with, but I'm not sure. We need to see more tank and healer gameplay before we can figure that out. And then there is the more concerning thing. This clip more or less confirms that the Keves circle arts recharge just by waiting, as opposed to the Agnes diamond arts, which recharge via auto attacks. This does have the neat thing of making the Xenoblade 1 character classes play more like Xenoblade 1, and the Xenoblade 2 character classes play more like Xenoblade 2, but there are a lot of things I don't like about this. I've gone on the record to say that I just don't like the whole waiting around thing, as opposed to the actually charging up your arts with auto attacks and being proactive in making your things come off of cooldown, so I don't really feel the need to elaborate on why I don't like that it's here at all in the first place. But in addition to that, there are some questionably long cooldowns on Noah's arts here. There's nothing to go off of for Thrust Edge since it's only used at the very end of the clip, but for Sword Strike and Air Slash, based on the amount of recharge we can see them get by the end of it and the amount of time it takes after it starts recasting to get to that point, it looks like Sword Strike's recast is 24 seconds and Air Slash's is 20. I'm going to compare these cooldowns to Shulk's arts in Xenoblade 1. I consider Xenoblade 1's combat to be the second slowest in the series after Skells and X, and Noah's sword fighter class is very clearly based on Shulk. It would have been stupid if it wasn't, so I think this is a fair comparison. Obviously, Shulk gets a lot more arts than Noah has, but I'm only going to focus on Shulk's 3 most spammable arts. They're 3 of the earliest he gets, and they're also the ones he has with the shortest cooldown. I think that's good game design to give the shortest cooldowns first and the longer ones later, so you have your big spammable arts that can make you do more things frequently first. So we're going to compare those to Noah, and thankfully, there are some pretty easy comparisons to make, because of those 3 arts, one of them is backslash, a back attack, one of them is air slash, a side break, and one of them is slit edge, a side defense down. We're going to put slit edge with air slash, and not air slash with air slash, because the side break with the side break and the back attack with the back attack makes sense, so cancel attack and side defense down are kind of the odd ones out. We have no idea what thrust edge's cooldown is, but just for the sake of completeness, backslash's default cooldown, so without any art levels up, is 20 seconds, the same as the shorter of the 2 cooldowns we do have a good idea of. Then comparing side break to side break, Xenoblade 1, air slash's default cooldown 15 seconds, sword strike's cooldown 24 seconds. And then comparing the odd ones out, Slit Edge's default cooldown is 10 seconds, and Air Slash in Xenoblade 3's cooldown is 20 seconds. So, while admittedly a Shulk that is the same level 12 as Noah is in this clip would not have learned Air Slash yet, he would have 5 arts plus either a talent art or 2 arts from Activate Monado, while this level 12 Noah has 3 arts and a talent art, and those 3 arts have even longer cooldowns than equivalent ones from early game Xenoblade 1. And if I already consider 1's combat to be among the slowest in the series, and it looks like at a similar level, a similar class is going to play even slower than that, I think you can sort of start to see where I'm getting concerned from. I think the 3-to-1 comparison is the most reasonable and most fair one you could possibly make, which is why I focused on that, but I do also want to very briefly compare Noah to Xenoblade 2 as well. I'm going to take Rex with just his junk sword, so that is before meeting Pyra, and take a look at the 4 arts he has there. Xenoblade 2 arts recharge from auto attacks. So that means that with stutter stepping and the need to disengage from an enemy or move around, the cooldowns on arts are non-linear, so there's no reasonable way to directly compare them to circle arts from Xenoblade 3 or arts from 1 or X. However, pouch items do exist, and the Narsapear Jelly is one of the very first pouch items you can get in Xenoblade 2. If you give Rex pre-Pyra Narsapear Jelly as his pouch item, and then do not auto-attack whatsoever, 3 of his 4 arts will have cooldowns of 20 seconds or less. So, not only are Noah's arts here slower than their equivalents to Xenoblade 1, but they're slower than their equivalents in Xenoblade 2 without properly playing Xenoblade 2. The thing is, the problem with this isn't necessarily that it's like Xenoblade 1 or it's slow like Xenoblade 1, it's that it's slower than Xenoblade 1. So honestly, even if I did prefer 1's combat to 2, I'd still be concerned with this, because it seems like they're taking what 1 did and then making a more stripped down version of that that doesn't play to a lot of the advantages of that system. The thing that I really don't get about this is, not only do some arts work like they did in Xenoblade 2, which was already faster than 1, but there's also some kind of new mechanic present here that makes the 2 arts go even faster than they did in that game. As we see, not only does each one of Mia's 2 auto attacks charge up her arts a little bit in the release date trailer, but canceling 1 art out of that auto attack recharges the other by a really significant amount. So it's really, really unfair to the Xenoblade 1 side, because not only do you have 1 style arts put up against 2 style arts, but the 2 style arts recharge even faster than equivalent versions of them did in 2, while the 1 style arts are even slower than their equivalents from 1. So I really don't get it. The problems I have with cooldown arts get smaller and smaller the more of them you have access to, and the shorter the cooldowns on them are, and just by the nature of this battle system, they obviously couldn't do much with the former, so the latter would make sense, but it looks like they did the opposite of that, which I really don't understand and really don't like. The best reasoning behind that I can think of is it's a misguided balancing thing. The one distinct advantage circle arts have over diamond arts is they can recharge while you're moving around, since you need to be auto-attacking, and auto-attacking only happens when standing still, like in Xenoblade 2. But it seems like they overcorrected too hard for that, and I don't think they should be focusing on that kind of thing anyway. Most people I know play Xenoblade games because they like playing them, not for exceptional works of balance. So I would rather they aim for the fun side rather than the make sure every class is reasonably balanced with others in its role side. I feel like a lot of the issues I'm seeing already could have been easily alleviated if they just made the canceling arts recharge other arts that are off cooldown, apply to both circle and diamond arts, and then also tuned down the cooldowns of the circle arts a little bit, which is why I'm hoping that canceling thing is some sort of trait that you have to unlock, and Noah just hasn't gotten to it yet in this clip, but will within a few more levels. But yeah, it is kind of questionable, and it took a little bit of the wind out of my sails when it came to how interesting the combat system's been looking so far otherwise. I've been mostly talking about Noah here just because he's the one in this clip and has the strongest comparison to Shulk that can be made in order to properly express my concerns in relation to another game, but this would obviously apply to all of the other Keves classes, and while the one clip of Uni shows that her art animations are very fast and the speed at which her arts recharge is roughly on par with Noah, so I see no reason for her to be worse, barring healers just not being fun to play in this game, and especially not if something that we haven't seen yet makes Keves combat better. I am especially concerned about Lance, because he is obviously going to play a lot like Ryan did, and while we don't really get to see any of his arts in action, we can see a little bit of combat with him being controlled without any UI present, and while his auto attacks are perfectly fine and serviceable, his art animations are really long and really slow. And again, longer and slower than Ryan's art animations, which is making him come off as an even slower Ryan, which is again, not doing the Xenoblade 1 side any favors. If you're gonna include Xenoblade 1 stuff, at least keep it the same as it was in that game. Don't take it and make it even slower. You're just going to annoy even the people who did like Xenoblade 1's combat more. As animations themselves, they're great and wouldn't look out of place in a Monster Hunter game, but slow, deliberate Monster Hunter combat is not the kind of thing you want to see in your Xenoblade game that's heavily based on animations and timing things properly and canceling things, and especially not when an art can't start recharging again until after the animation has finished playing in its entirety, which does appear to be the case in this game. So, not only are Lens's art animations longer and slower, meaning you can't do things as frequently as you could with shorter, faster art animations, but the cooldowns are also effectively longer than they would be for any other class, so there are a lot of things that I think you can reasonably be concerned about when it comes to this combat system. We also have not seen canceling an art into an art yet. That does seem to be a technically superfluous thing that I could easily see them removing in favor of things like fusion arts, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it's some sort of passive thing that you have to unlock at some point in the story like it was in Xenoblade 2, or if it's just something you won't unlock until a little bit further on in the levels than we've seen in any combat demonstrations so far. It does seem like you get character switching and auto attack canceling right off the bat, so there's at least some level of complexity starting at the beginning, even if some of the character gameplay appears like it's going to be even slower than the sometimes agonizing early game Xenoblade 2. I just mentioned switching there, and that really is the big elephant in the room. We don't know how switching affects art cooldowns, and while this could potentially make everything a complete non-issue, they're not showing us that, so I have to critique things based off of what I can easily glean from what we do have. I personally can't come up with a good solution for how art recharging and character switching would work, because I can only think of things that would be bad or completely broken. From character A, you can only swap to character B and character C. There are 3 other playable party members that you're going to need to do multiple swap inputs in order to directly control. As a result of this, I do not think that character switching is going to have a cooldown. It would be really bad if you'd have to wait through multiple swap cooldowns just in order to move from one character to one other character. They could do it so that it'll only go on cooldown if you don't swap characters within a couple seconds, or you release the tactics button so the prompts to swap go away, or something like that. But the thing about that is how all of this interacts with art cooldowns. If swapping to a character resets all of their cooldowns, and you have unlimited swaps, that's completely broken. If swapping to a character does not reset their cooldowns based on what the AI's been doing, and you have unlimited swaps, that could get really annoying depending on how the AI works, because you might be saving your arts for a big burst thing or to do a combo properly or something like that, but then you swap to another character as you're waiting for things to charge up, and all of their arts are on cooldown so you can't do anything, other than cycle through characters to try and find someone who has something you can actually use. If swapping characters is limited in some way, and swapping to a character resets all their cooldowns, or at least they reset once the character swap is locked in, then that is significantly more balanced and will make swapping characters feel a lot less annoying if the AI likes to spam arts a lot. But if you're stuck with that character for too long before being allowed to swap again, it might completely outdo the amount of complexity on a character-by-character basis that we lost after Xenoblade 2 in order to gain the switching mechanic in the first place. It really does seem like the amount of classes we're going to get access to, the customization available on a character-by-character basis, and the switch mechanic are going to be the make-or-break things that determine whether or not 3's combat lives up to the heights shown in 2 and X, but unfortunately, those are basically the only 3 aspects of the combat system we've seen pretty much nothing about so far, so we're left with speculating on incomplete information and lots of concern. Having to wait to learn about that stuff is of course exacerbated by the fact that those 3 elements I just talked about are probably the ones that are least explainable in just a Twitter thread, and as such we would need to wait for some sort of non-E3 direct with a treehouse segment actually having people play through the game and show things off, so we're left with these worries for a lot longer than we would be if we were worrying about less important aspects of the game. Gameplay stuff aside though, I hope we get a treehouse segment for this game, because the Xenoblade ones are always fantastic. One of the X ones was really neat, because it was the only time I've ever seen Takahashi do like a live Q&A with people who were talking about the game and stuff, so that's an extremely out of the ordinary thing. That's also where we learned that Napon were based on owls and penguins, so that's kind of important. And then the 2017 Xenoblade 2 treehouse segment is genuinely one of the funniest videos I have ever watched. You could clearly tell that Xenoblade 2's tutorials were so bad that even the people localizing them were having trouble actually learning from them properly. And then there was just the fact that one person, I don't remember who it was trying to talk about Tora and saying, oh, I didn't like Tatsu a lot in X, so hopefully Tora is a lot better, and from what I've seen, he really is so far. Except they were a Nintendo employee on a live stream to shill a Nintendo product, which meant they were not allowed to say anything negative about Xenoblade Chronicles X, so they had to insult Tatsu without actually insulting Tatsu, and it was genuinely hilarious. I would love to see people trying to throw shade on the bad aspects of Xenoblade 2, but not actually being able to criticize Xenoblade 2, because it's product, people need to buy product. Just because the developers said you can start with 3 doesn't mean we don't want to sell 2 to them as well. So, yeah, I am very much looking forward to the most passive-aggressive roasting of gacha, field skills, and bad tutorials that I have ever seen. Speaking of that concern, I want to take a look at the levels of characters in various clips to try and see how Monolith chose to respond to the common criticism of Xenoblade 2, that it takes a long time to get going gameplay-wise, and you don't get a lot of core mechanics until fairly late in the game. It does seem like we're going to get all of the core mechanics a lot earlier than it took to get all of them, or at least all of their relative equivalents in Xenoblade 2, but it also seems like things are going to start out really bare bones, and then dump a bunch of things on us all at the same time. As I said before, in the level 12 Noah clip, you have access to the 3 regular arts, the 1 talent art, and the tactics menu, which includes the option to swap characters. You are missing the left side of the arts palette, which means no cross-class arts, so you are limited to not only 3 regular arts, but also only arts from 1 class and only arts of 1 shape. The interlink button, which means no Ouroboros, the fusion art button, which means no interactivity from your regular arts and cross-class arts, and no chain attacks. Not to worry, this is not an early game Xenoblade 1 situation where you can't revive until you're given the party gauge, because that has been turned into just a role action that all healers have access to, so as long as the healer's in the party, that much isn't an issue, but at least for the first 12 levels, you really don't have a lot to play with. Keep in mind, in Xenoblade 2, you did not have chain attacks, of course, but you still had blade specials, elemental combos, weaknesses and resistances, parts of the driver combo, and Rex had 2 blades by level 12, so there were at least more arts than Noah has access to here. Character switching could obviously make up for this because, well, if you put all the characters combined, that's way more than Rex's arts with 2 blades, but again, we don't know how switching works, and if it's clunky and doesn't guarantee you're going to get new arts that are off of cooldown when you change to another character, it might still not be that great. Starting slow is fine, and with character switching it does seem like it will at least be a bit faster at easing you into complex things than Xenoblade 2 was, But the thing I'm more concerned about than the fact that you have basically nothing at level 12 is the fact that you have basically everything at level 21. It seems like chain attacks in Xenoblade 3 rely on fusion arts to function, so it makes sense that you wouldn't get chain attacks until after you get those, but it's just a big spiral of complexity and new layers being added on top of each other. In order to have fusion arts, you need to have cross-class arts, which means the player needs to have access to the whole class system and the cross-classing thing and a heavy new layer of customization. That's already a lot of complexity to dump on someone at once. Then you have the next level, which is fusion arts. Then you have the next level, which is chain attacks, a completely new mechanic that seems to be a lot less straightforward than it was in any previous game in the series and might potentially have a really high learning curve. And then on top of all of that, you have Ouroboros, which seems to be an entire secondary combat system that, while it does seem to be fairly simple and fairly slow, is still basically the equivalent of learning Skell combat in X on top of on-foot combat. So that is 3 layers of new complex systems being given to the player within the span of 9 levels, potentially even less if that Mio clip wasn't taken directly after learning the last of those things you get access to. It is of course distinctly possible that the developers just used developer god mode in order to take these clips and didn't bother messing around with the flags that gave the players access to different mechanics and things, and the way you'll learn these is actually going to be a bit more organically spread out. But I do think that, especially until we see whether or not the tutorials have improved from Xenoblade 2, this is a potential concern primarily for people who are starting the series at Xenoblade 3, or who already didn't like 2's combat system and are concerned that 3 is going to be more of the same. I hope we can all agree that this was a very impressive amount of milking content to have a 20-second clip, even by my standards, but there is one last thing. Nothing that has to do with combat. There's just some weird glowy thing in the background here, and I have no idea what that is. It might just be another buried Blant, but those are usually found by the water, and that seems to be far away from it by Blant standards. And it also seems to be like a little bit of a light beacon, so I don't know what it is. It could be an indicator that there's some sort of bigger collection point than just the regular item orbs out there, like an ether crystal deposit equivalent or something like that. Or you could possibly place a waymark on the map. This is the people who made Breath of the Wild. I wouldn't be surprised if they ported some of the navigation things from that game into here, especially since it seems to be more open world than Xenoblade 1 and 2 are. There's not really a lot that can be said about that, but it's an interesting thing in the environment, and if it's not something that was put there by the player themselves, I'm probably going to want to check it out when I get there. I know, it feels like we've seen so much and come so far since that first trailer a couple months ago, and because of that, this next post will definitely feel like a major blast from the past. That's right, it's a good old classic character bio, where Japanese got 2 tweets, and English only got 1. This time we're talking about Kamaravi. The English post reads, "This spear-wielding warrior is Kamaravi, commander of Agnes's Colony Delta in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. A mighty general who values respect in combat, his fiery passion on the battlefield has earned him the name Smoldering Kamaravi." Fire emoji. Because this is Twitter and Nintendo thinks they're up with the kids and what they're doing with the emojis, yo. The second Japanese tweet says, "Kamaravi is a fiery hot man who has a warrior-like personality and behavior, honors a clean battle, and pays homage to his enemy Keves." The first thing to discuss with him is his English title. It has been localized to Smoldering Kamaravi, which a lot of people, including I, were off-put by because the fan-translated title going around was Crimson Lotus Kamaravi, which definitely sounds a lot cooler. That's not to say that Smoldering doesn't make sense. He very clearly has some Fireblade influence in him, what with the being on fire and the fiery weapon and fiery hair that looks sort of like Senna's but red. It's just that Crimson Lotus kind of sounds cooler. However, I have also seen the take that what we were getting as Crimson Lotus in fan translations was just a different reading of the kanji in his title, and it could also be read to read something that translates a lot more directly to Smoldering or Burning Kamaravi, which would make the English title make a lot more sense. I think it would be a weird outlier for basically every other proper name in the game to be translated almost directly or just be a romanized version of the Japanese name, and this one specific character's title to be wildly different to the point of not making sense. So I think that the reading different from what the fan translated used for the kanji is the reason why there's such a big discrepancy between what we were expecting and what we actually got for his title. As for everything else, The additional 2 screenshots in the second Japanese tweet are just screenshots from the trailer showing him, so there's not too big a deal there. But in his official art, if we look at his lance, we can see that its hilt bears some resemblance to the hilt of Numa's sword when Rex uses Infinity Blade in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, potentially drawing some more connection towards the higher-ups and strongest warriors of Agnes and the hero of Allrest. We can also very clearly see the clock on his weapon in this official art, and if you pay attention to a few screenshots of Ethel, both past and present, you can see that she also does have a clock on her weapon. So, yeah, any weapon called a blade has a clock on it. Not really a big deal. I think the most interesting thing about the Kamaravi tweets is the official art and the zoom in on his face we get, because everything else about his personality and being an honorable warrior is stuff that we pretty much knew. The fact that he honors his enemy as well as his ally is a bit different, and it's possible that some of what causes Mio to start trusting the Keves party came from Kamaravi's influence and his belief that Keves soldiers are just as honorable as Agnes ones. If we look at his face though, we can see he has the exact same sunken in eyes that Iserd has, so either they're related, every Agnes colony commander doesn't get sleep, or there's something going on with them, and I am thinking that Iserd and Kamaravi are both blade eaters of some kind, and they get the tired eyes as a result of that, just because we can't see their chests, so we can't see what's going on with the core crystal there, but they have ether lines and a lot of blade-esque characteristics, except blades don't look tired like that, so I kind of feel like it's some sort of unnatural genetic engineering implant that caused them to look tired and be like a bit paler than other Allrestian humans usually are. There's definitely something up there, and I think Blade Eater is the most simple explanation for it. Japan only got the Kamaravi bio on May 10th, but the English language accounts also tweeted out a localized version of the running away is a valid tactic tweet that Japan got a couple weeks ago. The tweet says, "Keep a keen eye, enemies in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 can often be seen moving through the areas you travel. There are some big bruisers out there, so if you pick a fight you can't handle, then don't be afraid to run away and live to fight another day." There is absolutely nothing to glean from this that wasn't present in the original Japanese one, and anything that was invalidated by other more detailed tweets about the area later on. But the funny thing is, a select portion of Nintendo of America's video tweets have closed captions available for them, and when the battle theme starts in this one, it just says epic woodwind and piano music, which it isn't incorrect, but it is very funny that you put it that way, and I hope things like that continue to happen in the future. I know a lot of people also really liked Noah's voice line there, where he's just nonchalantly like, well, we've been found, which it makes sense that he's freaking out a lot less than Shulk and Rex are when they get spotted by more enemies, because, again, child soldier, I'm sure he's seen far worse than a level 14 Rattle Aspar. Also, I guess it's called Rattle Aspar when I thought it would be called Rattling Aspar in a previous video, so sorry about that. Maybe I shouldn't be using machine translation if it's going to give me these horribly inaccurate terms in the future, so my apologies for being really bad at what I do. As for the 11th, the Japan tweets were very UI intensive, so there are no localized versions of them as of now. The first is, there are 4 types of monsters in the enemy. I know what this actually means, but again, very funny machine translation. Normal, Elite, Unique, and Lucky, which can be identified by the mark above. Elites are stronger than normal, so be careful, and keep in mind that there are powerful unique monsters with 2 names inside. This puts to bed all of the wild guessing I was doing about different frames for enemy HP bars when I was talking about the last trailer. It basically just says there are 4 types of non-boss enemies. Regular monsters and unique monsters are exactly the same as they've been in every Xenoblade game so far, barring being called Tyrants and X, so those don't really need to be talked about. Unique monsters get the more ornate RNG white wings on the HP bar compared to normals. Then there are elite monsters, which are the ones with the slightly less ornate blue wings next to the HP bar. This was the thing I really didn't know anything about when I was talking about the previous trailer, and I was confused because there were like 3 different types of wings, and I wasn't sure because I thought blue was a unique monster, but then there was an enemy in the trailer that had a very non-unique monster name, and it seems like elite monsters are not any special thing. They're basically just alpha Pokemon from Legends Arceus. A random enemy on the field will just occasionally win the RNG lottery and get powered up, probably not to the level of an actual unique. I would imagine that some quest enemies, instead of being full-on bosses, are just going to be an enemy spawn that is guaranteed to be an elite just to make a quest boss harder than just some generic on-field enemy, but that is more speculation because, again, we haven't seen anything about questing in this game yet. As for lucky enemies, the second tweet explains what they are a little bit more. Lucky is the same strength as normal, but it seems that good items are easy to get. If you find a lucky monster, you might want to take on the challenge. This screenshot is really funny because the enemy being used to demonstrate things is a level 24 land Ferris, but the party is all level 43 for some reason. I don't know why. I think that's hilarious. We're in a different area of the big plains that we've been seeing a lot of so far. There's some Armu in the background, and it looks like it connects to the desert because we can see that. And there's also what appears to be the head of the Gormati Titan in the background, as well as what might be another waymark or an indicator of a quest, as there's some sort of small orange pillar of light next to that one item orb among the plants. This does pretty much line up with one of the question marks on the minimap, so I would not be surprised whatsoever if there's a bit more far-range indicator of when an NPC is a quest objective or someone who will give a quest. As for the names of these areas, underneath the minimap, the top line says Lieb Plateau and the bottom line says Dumas Head. So while we do learn about the Milik Meadows and Aegis Wilderness areas, it seems like this location, despite seemingly being in the meadows, is not considered one of those areas, and is probably some sort of transition between the two of them. There's actually a third location though, as on the bottom of the screen we can see a hexagon with an exclamation point in it, which is probably the side quest objective, and underneath that text saying Cadencia region. So it seems like this is how it will indicate when you have a side quest that is in a different map. And if you're on that map, then it will actually point you in the right direction with a direction and distance indicator like in Xenoblade 1 or 2. Kinda interesting that it was moved to the bottom of the screen, but I guess it makes sense if the whole Y button show/hide current objective prompt is there like it's always been. After spending all of that time talking about the area, what actually are lucky enemies? They're basically a different version of elite enemies where instead of getting stronger, they get more guaranteed item drops. So if you see one, basically you can kill it and you can get stuff. It is indicated by sparkles surrounding the HP bar, and while we have no indication as to whether or not an enemy can be lucky and elite at the same time, I kind of doubt that would be the case, and this makes the whole UI make a lot more sense, as in various times when you see enemies out on the field, you can see that next to their level tags, they'll either have the blue elite wings or the lucky sparkles, so now some more UI elements make sense. Also, in all of these screenshots, we can see way more enemies loaded in on the field than we could see in any previous game in the series, just showing that Xenoblade 3 is even more technically impressive than 2 was. Meanwhile, instead of all this, on May 11th, the English accounts only just got the DPS explanation. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 attackers are skilled at going on the offensive and can target enemies from the side or from behind to deal massive damage. Though they lead the attack for their party, their damage output also makes them tempting targets for enemies. Nothing new about that, but there is a little bit more of a clip with some more English voice lines, some more item orbs, and another massive load of crust tips in the background, so I guess that's pretty cool. And then we get the unique monster tweet. Enemy may be attacked by multiple people. For strong enemies like unique monsters, it is recommended to lure them one by one and fight. Oh, sorry, this apparently isn't the unique monster description. This is just the guess what the lore command is coming back description, because it shows Noah luring a one unique monster for me from a flock of like 30 of them, which again, that's a lot of models on screen. We also get like 5 seconds of the unique monster theme. That's neat. Sounds like another all-time schmanger just from that. They're really putting the flute and an electric guitar together, so I would love to see what they can come up with that. The UM's name translates to migratory bird Kilki or Kilka, so I'm guessing that's what its name is going to be in English. And while the player never actually like draws a weapon to initiate combat, so we can't see any arts or things like that, we do get a bit more context for some UI elements. The first one is obviously just the unique monster wings on both sides of the HP bar. That's what we're going to expect to see on UMs in the future, okay. We also can now, by process of elimination, guess what boss HP bars will look like, as the one fight scene in the second trailer where Valdi was in the party and they were facing off against this giant face mechon looking thing, the enemy's HP bar had these even more ornate white-orange wings than the UM ones, so that's probably what a boss bar is going to look like. We could also see that when the fight is started, a timer appears in a kinda awkward position underneath the enemy HP bar. Might want to move that to somewhere else later on. But this shows that the timing your fights against UM's mechanic is back, so you could do time trials against super bosses and compare and compete with your friends or try to better yourself. There's also a little flame in the middle of the HP bar. This was also seen on that boss in the second trailer, so it looks like certain powerful enemies are going to have an indicator directly on their HP bar for when they're going to do something like Enrage, Elemental Awakening, or entering a second phase. My guess would also be that, like, hopeless boss fights, or ones where you need to get an enemy's HP down a certain threshold before a cutscene happens and something else goes on, that will also have an indicator somewhere on the HP bar to let you know what you can actually shoot for, so you can reliably chain attack when you're 5% away from hitting the threshold. That's all you need to do to get the next cutscene instead of overextending early on. Another quality of life thing the Trails series added before the Xenoblade series. You'll love to see it happen. Before the battle begins, we can still see a lot of the exploration UI, and we can see that somewhere north of the player on the minimap is a green diamond, which is probably a side quest objective. It is to the left of where the player is facing, and if you look underneath Noah and Mio's HP bars, you can in fact see what appears to be an indicator pointing towards that objective, so it looks like that's how things will be shown on the overworld. And underneath the minimap, we can also see a one-line area name with no secondary line. This is the Japanese name of what we now know to be the Melic Meadows. Before we get into the description of the Melic Meadows and Aegis Wilderness, I want to go back to the English running away is a valid tactic clip and talk about some things that are there for like 3 frames. The first is the area name. Aegis Wilderness is something we'll learn a lot more about later on, but the sub-area is called Racine's Platter. This, when combined with the area called Dumas' Head in the Lieb Plateau, again, we don't have official translations for those, so I might be slightly wrong, seems to suggest that location names are going to have a new theme in this game that was not present in anything in the past. And that is, drumroll please, completely out of nowhere, French literature! Jean Racine was a 17th century playwright, and Alexandre Dumas was a 19th century author who is most famous for The Three Musketeers, which is something I went on a massive tangent about in a Xenoblade X video a few months ago, so that's a weird thing to come back around to. But I don't know what to say. I'm guessing there are just going to be other literary references, not necessarily limited to just France, in other areas throughout the game. I think it's neat, but we're going to need a lot more data points before we can even begin to figure out what any of this means. I do love the idea that you've got these 2 warring factions whose accents are largely British, and they have to come together to fight a real enemy, and in order to do so, they journey through a lot of areas that are named after French people, so it's like, haha, yes, the real enemy of these 2 British kingdoms. It's the French the entire time. If the secret enemy faction ends up having French accents, I am going to laugh really hard. While the area names themselves are just romanizations of what they were in Japanese, there is an icon underneath the location name that is not present in the Japanese trailer. It appears to be a circle with a fork and knife in it, a circle that is almost full but not completely full. This is what I'm going to guess is the replacement for pouch items in this game. With up to 7 party members on the field at once, having to choose an individual pouch item, or 2, or 3 in New Game Plus, for each character would get agonizing, so I'm guessing that they simplified it in a sort to where you can have Manana, who is a chef, cook meals for you, basically like Pyra, and then you can apply one of those to the entire party at once, and that will provide passive buffs of some sort. We've obviously never seen an actual fight with one of these in effect, and we haven't seen any menus whatsoever, so I have no idea what these passive buffs could be, but based on the fact that there seems to be an actual timer counting down, not only can you provide a passive buff to the entire party with one item, but there will also actually be a UI element tracking how much time is left on that buff, so you know better when and when not to replace it. If Manana the chef can cook, then it's also likely that Riku the mechanic can modify your weapons in some way, so he might be the source of this game's equivalent of augments, gems, and that kind of thing, or just the in-universe way that your weapons get modified, and I wouldn't be surprised if he also has some crafting type thing you can do in some places. There is one very blurry screenshot on the Japanese website that you can only get if you set the aspect ratio to a mobile one, and it appears as the background for the trailer videos, so you have to kind of just dig to see this at all, but it shows what appears to be the party camping out together, and you can see like Lance and Senna doing push-ups together, and everyone's just kind of hanging out. This could possibly be from a cutscene, as we see what appears to be the party hanging out together after the Wild Ride encounter and the whole Ouroboros thing, which is before they set off together formally. So it could be part of that cutscene, but it could also be a campsite-related thing. There's a machine in the background that could be part of Van Damme's mech, which we've seen in other shots in the second trailer, but it also sort of looks like an ether furnace, so that could also be some source of some sort of upgrades or something. But just in general, I think Torna campsites were very well received because you could do all the conversations and things. It was a way to do rested experience and that kind of thing. They were always like near landmarks and stuff, so they were easy to travel to. And the crafting was so much better than base Xenoblade 2 because instead of having to go to a different place in the world and teleport and watch through the loading screens and all that, for every single different type of crafting you did, you could just go to one campsite, of which there were many throughout the world, and just make them all from the same menu. Again, we haven't seen any menus in Xenoblade 3 yet, so hopefully they're better than any previous game in the series. And I mean, I'm hoping they do better than they have done in the past. And I think this is a very easy way they could justify having crafting all in the same menu again, especially since the party is on the run from basically everybody, so campsites are likely going to be the places where they spend their nights a lot throughout the story, so having certain campsites be reached at certain story moments like in Torna, and then being able to use those campsites as a home base to do a bunch of different things that would only make sense at an inn or a town or something in another RPG, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I hope they do something like that. In this clip and many others, you can see the phenomena we observed in the past, that getting close to an item orb will have it turn into a 2D sprite indicating what type of item it is, so you know whether or not to pick it up. And especially in other shots, you can clearly see that not only are there more item orbs on average than there were in Xenoblade 1 and X, but they also seem to be a lot more deliberately placed to give you a better indication of what type of item would be in it before you even get close. So it looks like they are trying to go for best of both worlds with the 1 and 2 systems, and hopefully they figure that out. I am not completely convinced, but we've yet to actually see someone pick up an item orb, so we don't know if they'll only contain one item each. If they make it an instant pickup like in 1 and X, but give you multiple items per collection point like in 2, then I could see myself being happy with it, but if I have to go around picking up individual items again, I will not be amused. And now we've finally got the description of the two major areas we've been seeing all throughout the trailer and supplemental information. The first tweet reads, "A river flows through the vast grasslands of Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Millic Meadows. The lush nature on display here sure looks inviting, but beware, the creatures and even plants who live here don't take kindly to passers-by." Based on enemy level ranges, it does look like this is the first of the two areas we'll visit, but it's a little weird because the first image here we've shown looks like it's closer to Araya than the desert area we've seen before, but this might just be a perspective trick, and a lot more of the Aegis Wilderness is hidden behind that first cliff. We can also see on the lower left-hand side of the screen a ruined Kamos guidepost from Bionis Leg in Xenoblade 1, and above that we can see what appears to be parts of the more Ardain Titan. To the upper right we can see one of the classic Xenoblade 1 Arky Hills from Bionis Leg, and the entire river area in general just looks like it could be a piece of Bionis Leg copy-pasted into 3, which I'm not too sure I like. More on that later. The second image, though, is the one everyone was popping off for, because after being seen in the background, and then a little bit closer in a later clip, we have finally got Rotbart front and center. There is no UI in this image, again, fueling my conspiracy theories that we'll finally get a proper photo mode in a Xenoblade game after 10 years. But more importantly, the boy is here. The boy is big. We can't see his level yet, but we know exactly what it is. And he's using the same model as Xenoblade 2. That's not really a surprise. Most enemy types in 1 that were also in 2 use their 2 models in DE. A lot of 2 models are already being reused in this game. This is just smart asset reuse. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is an MMO-inspired series. You should not be surprised that they're reusing a lot of enemy models. They're probably going to be able to get away with continuously using Xenoblade 2 ones until Nintendo completely drops the current Switch model, so expect to see a lot of things reused from 2. In between the crust tips on the left half of the screen, we can also see a lot of either the footprint thing from Xenoblade 2 or red item orbs. Not entirely sure what that's about, because we can see a bunch of regular item orbs around as well, so that's probably a side quest related thing, or just some tracker or UI element that isn't disableable in whatever is being used to take this image. Hopefully not DevTools. Give me a photo mode. The third picture is just another angle of the same area. We can only see one red item orb looking thing in this shot and no purple one, so that's interesting. We get the guidepost from another angle. We can see that the river actually comes down from a waterfall that appears to come out of the snow that the Urian Titan is on. And there's a big fin thing that looks like part of some Titan, Uriah, Gormot, Tantal, whatever. So there's a lot of 1 and 2 combined things. It's almost like we knew that already. This is probably the least interesting of this set of pictures, honestly. The last one shows another shot that really could just be a ported version of Bionis Leg into Xenoblade 3, because some of the level design is almost identical. There's the guidepost, and that has like 5 item orbs right in front of it, which again suggests that the item orb placement is a little less random. There's some bird enemies, there's a river, there's rocks, there's hills. This sure is a plain in a Xenoblade game. These are always the least interesting areas to talk about because we know exactly what we're going to get every single time. It's an early game Xenoblade plain. We're going to go here after the party comes together. We might see Ethel or someone else here, and then bad things will happen and another group will fuse into an Ouroboros. Video games. Second tweet talks about that big desert area we've seen. If you like sand in your shoes, then pay a visit to Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Aegis Wilderness. You may spot a familiar landmark while evading this desert sandstorms. Is that a giant mechanical finger? I don't know why it says finger singular. There are at least 2 fingers here. But yeah, this is the desert area with a fallen arm and the weird orange foliage. It looks like the big fight between the 2 parties takes place here. Then they go back to the Milk Meadows, and then they come through here again on the way to Sword March, because we could very clearly see some of the snow and clouds coming off of Araya in the background there, as well as some more seemingly strategically placed item orbs, and a couple vaults. And by a couple, I mean like 6, because there are a lot more enemies in this game on screen at once, so fights are going to be really fun with more players and more enemies. The second image shows what sort of looks like Spiral Valley from Xenoblade 1. There's another red item orb looking thing that seems to be more fire than anything, so wonder what that's about. A lot more purple item orbs, some Taus, some other birds. The enemies in the area don't look at all like Spiral Valley, so while this is probably that section of Bionis Leg, it looks like there's been a much bigger climate shift there than in some of the other areas. And in the cave in the background, there are some shining pillars coming off of what appears to be a wall of crystal, so I'm thinking that ether crystal deposits are going to come back in some aspect in this game. Third image shows more of the same under cliffy area. There's the camels there, there's the item orbs, there's another tree. The most interesting thing about this, though, is the zip line connecting the upper hill on the right side to a slightly shorter hill on the left side. So it looks like that one rail grinding scene from the first trailer is going to not be an isolated thing, and you're actually going to have a lot of rail grinding and stuff. So I like more overworld movement options. That's nice. They should do more of that, but without field skills. Fourth picture at first looks like nothing new, but there are a few things. We can see that the wilderness area is not all just craggy desert. There is some straight up sand like Dana and Torna, so that's kind of interesting. That big cool yellow lizard crystally enemy that we saw in the trailer is right up front and center, so that's pretty cool. That's a great design. I love all the new enemy models. Then on the cliffs to the upper left, there is a floating rock. The whole Ionios becomes mirror theory gets a whole lot more plausible if you start seeing floating rocks in the desert, because I remember Oblivia even if you don't. Play X. And then possibly even more exciting than that, and at least less confusing than the floating rock thing, I really hope there's at least a side quest detailing why that is, because it would be really sloppy if this was just a mistake that ended up in an official Nintendo tweet. Anyway, behind the lizard thing is the unique monster tombstone model from Xenoblade 2. One of the most beloved quality of life additions that game made, allowing you to reliably and easily rematch unique monsters for purposes of self-improvement or farming. The scary thing about this is the tombstone is still there, and the big lizard enemy is there. Usually the tombstone would disappear when you resummoned a unique monster. This lizard guy is not the unique monster tied to that tombstone. If the big lizard is also a UM, they are too close together. I better see challenge runs of people fighting them both at the same time, that's all I'm gonna say. All things considered, I think Aegis Wilderness is definitely my favorite of the two areas, at least so far. The little landmarks from Bionis Leg and Gormott that show up in all the Milk Meadows shots are really nice as Easter eggs, because returning players will see that and be like, yo, I recognize that, but they're so subtle that a new player won't notice that it's obviously a reference to something and feel left out. But on the other hand, I can see several sections of the map that are more or less directly pulled from either Xenoblade 1 or 2, and I don't know how I feel about areas not just being visual mashups of things from 1 and 2, but also level design mashups as well, especially because I think both games have ways they could have improved as far as their level design goes, and I would much rather they just make another X as far as the open world goes than put together areas of 1 and 2 and hope something good comes out of it. While the Mechanis arm is obviously right there in the middle of the wastelands, it's not the same level design as the Fallen Arm area, barring being able to go up to the distant fingertip again. It's in such bad shape that virtually none of the level design is the same as the original area from Xenoblade 1, and I think I would strongly prefer the location references to be cool set pieces for new, hopefully improved level design, rather than, remember this thing from the other game, here's the exact same thing again, with the obvious exception of visiting decrepit versions of important iconic areas from the previous games. Like, once you get to the Orion Titan, I better be able to visit a run-down version of Elethra Ruins and probably meet Pyra and Mythra there and then make a reference to the whole "this is where it all began" thing, and that's besides the point. But I would like more new level design than reused level design, because new has a chance of being better, while reused is always going to be the same it always was. I also don't have a place to put this, because I forget where it was in a screenshot, but someone found what is probably the arm of the more Ardain Titan, or I guess the Bionis' arm, but it seems too small to be that, somewhere in some of this stuff from the past week, and I think that's pretty cool. I'll put it on screen if I can find it here, but other than that, that's all I got for this week. I'll see you next week. I managed to make it under an hour this time, so hopefully I can keep that up, and maybe make another actual video. That would be neat to be able to do that at some point again. Until whenever, this is Luxon signing off. I am very tired.